I came home early and turned on the bedroom light. My fiancée was on the bed with another man. Both froze. She just said, "You're home already?" That calm reaction hit harder than anything. That's when. I came home early because a meeting ended 2 hours ahead of schedule, not because of intuition or suspicion. The drive back felt ordinary, and the only thing on my mind was the irritation of wasted hotel expenses that could not be refunded. I unlocked the apartment door quietly out of habit, stepped inside, and noticed the living room felt staged rather than lived in. Shoes were aligned too carefully near the wall, the couch pillows were arranged differently, and the air carried a faint cologne I did not use. I did not call out. I walked straight down the hallway and turned on the bedroom light. My fiancée, Claire Whitmore, was on the bed with another man. His name would later be confirmed as Jonah Price, but in that moment, he was simply someone who did not belong there. Both of them froze. There was no scramble, no shock loud enough to fill the room. Claire looked up at me with the kind of calm that does not come from innocence or surprise. She asked why I was home already, as if the problem was my timing rather than the scene in front of me. That calm reaction struck harder than the betrayal itself because it removed the possibility of confusion. This was not a mistake or a lapse. This was routine interrupted. I did not step back or leave the room. I stayed where I was and forced the situation to remain real. Jonah did not rush to dress or apologize. He sat up slowly, clearly familiar with the space, and reached for his phone on the nightstand without hesitation. Claire adjusted the sheets with practiced ease, not embarrassment. Every movement confirmed duration rather than impulse. I confronted them immediately, not with shouting or threats, but by refusing to let the moment dissolve into excuses. I asked how long this had been happening, not expecting honesty but demanding acknowledgement. Jonah answered before Claire could intervene, which told me everything about their internal dynamic. He spoke like someone who believed he had standing. Within minutes, the situation escalated through facts rather than emotion. Jonah admitted he had a key. Claire confirmed without flinching. He mentioned weekdays, not weekends, which aligned with my work travel schedule. I noticed my clothes had been moved to the smaller closet on the left side of the room, something I had assumed was an organizational choice weeks earlier. It was not. I told them to stop talking and stepped out of the apartment briefly, not to retreat, but to prevent the scene from being reframed later. I called Martin Hale, a close friend who lived nearby, and asked him to come over immediately. That decision would later protect me from several attempts at manipulation. When I returned with Martin, the atmosphere shifted. Claire's calm tightened into calculation. Jonah became quieter. The presence of a third party removed their ability to rewrite what was happening in real time. I began gathering essential items without packing theatrics. While doing so, I noticed a printer box tucked beneath the desk that did not belong to me. Inside it was a folder containing printed documents, not hidden particularly well, which suggested no one expected me to find them. The documents included scanned lease agreements with altered dates and signatures that looked like mine, but were not. I recognized formatting errors from previous versions I had actually signed. These were revisions, not originals. Martin noticed the documents at the same time and immediately suggested documenting their existence. That suggestion alone changed the balance of the room. Claire moved toward the desk instinctively, then stopped herself. Jonah said nothing. The documents made one thing clear. This situation had structure. The affair was not simply physical. It was logistical. It involved housing, finances, and forward planning that assumed my continued absence or compliance. I asked Jonah to leave. He hesitated, then complied, not with panic but irritation. Before leaving, he retrieved a jacket from the hallway closet, one I had not seen before, confirming he stored belongings there. He did not look back. Once he was gone, I did not argue with Claire. I told her the engagement was over effective immediately and that communication would go through third parties moving forward. Her calm finally cracked, not into tears, but into a defensive posture that involved minimizing the documents and reframing them as temporary precautions. She insisted nothing would have happened if I had not come home early. That statement removed any remaining ambiguity. Martin stayed with me while I collected what I needed and left the apartment that night. I did not sleep. I reviewed the documents repeatedly, noticing dates that coincided with my longest work trips. I checked bank notifications and realized several small changes had gone unnoticed because they were framed as convenience updates. Before morning, I contacted a legal consultant recommended by Martin, not to pursue revenge, but to understand exposure. The advice was immediate and blunt. I needed to separate finances, document interactions, and avoid being alone with Claire again. By midday, messages began arriving from mutual friends who had already heard a version of events that positioned Claire as calm and me as volatile. That timing told me the narrative had been prepared in advance. The final event of the day came from an unexpected direction. The building's superintendent, Howard Mills, contacted me regarding a routine access update. During that call, he casually mentioned that Jonah had been listed as an emergency contact for the apartment months earlier. He said it as if it were unremarkable. It was not. That single sentence reframed the entire situation. This was not a betrayal discovered by accident. This was a replacement already in progress. By the end of the first day, I was no longer reacting. I was preparing. The morning after I left the apartment did not bring distance or clarity. It brought speed. Everything that had been hidden began moving at once, as if my early return had forced a premature launch of plans that were never meant to be exposed this soon. I stayed at Martin Hale's place and spent the early hours organizing what I already knew rather than chasing new information. That decision mattered. By the time my phone started lighting up, I already understood that silence would be interpreted as guilt, while noise would be used against me. I chose precision instead. The first wave came from mutual friends. Messages arrived that were polite on the surface but loaded underneath. Several asked whether I was okay while repeating the same phrasing, which told me they had heard a prepared version of events. None asked what I had seen. They asked what I had done. That distinction revealed the direction the story was being pushed. By late morning, I learned that Claire Whitmore had contacted people before I even left the building. She had framed the situation as a misunderstanding caused by my unexpected arrival and emotional instability. The calm reaction I witnessed the night before was now being repurposed as evidence of her composure under pressure. I did not respond publicly. Instead, I checked shared accounts. What I found was not catastrophic on its own, which was the point. Payments had been rerouted in small increments. Utilities were consolidated. Subscription services were renamed. Nothing large enough to trigger alerts. Together, they formed a pattern of quiet repositioning. The structure assumed I would continue funding stability without direct oversight. That afternoon, I received a call from Denise Rourke, someone Claire worked with, but who was not part of my social circle. She did not sound comfortable. She asked whether I knew Jonah Price had been present at work events with Claire months earlier. She did not accuse or speculate. She asked because she believed I already knew. That call accelerated everything. Denise explained that Jonah had been introduced as a temporary presence at first, then gradually normalized. The story was that I traveled often and preferred privacy. No one questioned it because the explanation matched my schedule. I realized then that my absence had been narrated for me. I scheduled a meeting with a legal advisor that same day, not to threaten action, but to establish boundaries. I was told to document timelines, restrict communication, and prepare for attempts to provoke a reaction that could be used later. That advice was confirmed within hours. Claire reached out directly for the first time since I left. The message was not emotional. It was procedural. She proposed discussing logistics, emphasizing fairness and closure. That tone did not match someone surprised by exposure. It matched someone adjusting a plan. I declined to meet alone and suggested third-party coordination. Her response was delayed longer than expected. When it arrived, it carried a warning disguised as concern. She suggested that pushing the situation further could complicate things unnecessarily. The implication was clear. That evening, Martin and I returned briefly to the apartment to retrieve additional belongings under controlled conditions. The building's superintendent, Howard Mills, was present at my request. His presence shifted the atmosphere immediately. Claire was no longer directing the flow of the situation. She was responding to it. During that visit, Howard confirmed something he had mentioned casually the day before. Jonah had been registered not only as an emergency contact, but as an authorized guest with recurring access. The paperwork had been submitted months earlier. It included signatures that mirrored mine closely enough to pass casual review. Howard was not accusatory. He was factual. He explained the process and how often similar arrangements occurred. That explanation removed any remaining doubt about intent. This was not opportunistic behavior. It was infrastructural. While gathering items, I noticed additional changes that now made sense. Storage labels had been rewritten. A spare key was missing from its usual place. Even the internet account name had been altered. These were not emotional decisions. They were operational. The next twist arrived from an unexpected direction. Claire's younger cousin, Olivia Kern, contacted me late that night. She had not been told to. She reached out because she recognized patterns she had seen before within the family. Olivia explained that Claire had prepared for transitions quietly in the past, always framing them as mutual decisions after the fact. This was the first time the timing had failed. Olivia did not ask me to forgive or forget. She warned me that escalation would not come loudly. It would come through systems. The warning proved accurate the following morning. I was contacted regarding a complaint that had been filed alleging intimidation during the confrontation. The details were vague, which suggested they were meant to create uncertainty rather than hold up under scrutiny. Because I had not been alone and had documented timelines, the complaint stalled immediately. Still, the attempt revealed willingness to weaponize procedure. At the same time, the property management company initiated a review of the altered lease documents after inconsistencies were flagged. That review froze changes Claire had assumed were permanent. The structure she relied on began stalling. Friends who had gone silent started asking questions rather than making assumptions. The shift was subtle but noticeable. The narrative lost cohesion as facts resisted simplification. The final event of Part 2 occurred when Jonah Price resurfaced indirectly. A background inquiry connected to the lease review exposed unresolved housing disputes associated with his name. Those disputes were not my doing, but their timing intersected with everything else. The stability Claire had attached herself to began wobbling. By the end of the second phase, nothing had exploded publicly, but everything was unstable. Plans that relied on silence, compliance, and delayed discovery were now operating in daylight. The calm that had dominated the first night was gone. What replaced it was friction from every direction, and it was only accelerating. The collapse did not begin with shouting or exposure. It began with delays. Emails stopped receiving immediate replies. Requests that had once been approved automatically were marked for review. Small administrative pauses appeared everywhere, each insignificant on its own, but together they formed resistance. The structure that had supported Claire Whitmore's quiet transition began rejecting its own weight. The property management review moved faster than expected. What Claire had assumed would take weeks advanced in days because the discrepancies were not isolated. The altered lease documents conflicted with archived versions stored by the management company's insurer. Those archives did not care about explanations or intent. They cared about consistency, and there was none. Howard Mills contacted me again, this time with a different tone. He was no longer providing casual updates. He was documenting interactions. He explained that access privileges tied to the apartment were being temporarily frozen pending clarification. That freeze applied to everyone, including Jonah Price. The timing was precise. Jonah arrived at the building later that afternoon and discovered his access no longer worked. The incident was logged automatically. That log mattered. Within hours, Jonah's presence shifted from tolerated to scrutinized. His name appeared repeatedly across systems that did not usually intersect. Housing records, access logs, and dispute databases overlapped in ways that exposed unresolved issues he had avoided by moving frequently. The apartment had not been a refuge. It had been a placeholder. Claire responded to the first signs of collapse with acceleration. She began contacting people rapidly, attempting to stabilize the narrative before systems finalized their conclusions. The effort was visible in its urgency. Messages arrived at odd hours. Requests were phrased as favors rather than explanations. At the same time, the professional environment Claire relied on began to resist her framing. An internal inquiry at her workplace expanded beyond its initial scope after Denise Rourke provided documentation contradicting earlier statements. The inquiry did not accuse. It asked questions that required consistent answers. Claire did not have those. The first public fracture occurred when Claire's explanation to one department conflicted with what she had told another. The inconsistency triggered escalation protocols that removed discretion from individual managers. What had once been handled quietly was now tracked formally. That afternoon, I attended a meeting with legal representation present, not to confront Claire, but to establish clear boundaries around shared assets and communication. The documentation from the lease review, financial records, and witness presence from the night of discovery aligned in ways that made exaggeration impossible. The goal was not to punish, but to stabilize exposure. Claire attempted to interrupt that process by filing an additional complaint, this one more detailed than the first. It failed faster than the previous attempt. Timelines did not support her version. Witness presence contradicted it. Digital records confirmed my location and actions. The attempt did more damage to her credibility than any response I could have made. As pressure mounted, new information surfaced from an unexpected direction. Ruth Calder, Claire's older sister, reached out privately. Her message was restrained, not emotional. She asked whether I was prepared for everything to surface at once. She explained that Claire had a pattern of controlled exits that relied on gradual replacement rather than confrontation. In previous relationships, the overlap had been smaller and the fallout contained. This time, the scale had exceeded her ability to manage. Ruth did not defend Claire. She warned me that Claire would likely attempt one decisive move once she realized control was lost. That warning proved accurate within 48 hours. Claire requested an urgent meeting mediated by a neutral third party. The request was framed as necessary for resolution, but the timing betrayed its purpose. She believed urgency could force concessions. I agreed to the meeting under strict conditions. During the meeting, Claire presented a revised narrative that attempted to recast the entire situation as mutual disengagement complicated by misunderstanding. The presentation was structured, rehearsed, and incomplete. When inconsistencies were addressed, she pivoted rather than clarified. The decisive moment came when documentation contradicted her timeline in real time. Not dramatically, but conclusively. The room went quiet not because of shock, but because resolution had been reached without debate. That same evening, Jonah Price's situation deteriorated independently. The housing disputes attached to his name triggered further review once his access privileges were suspended. Past complaints resurfaced. Employers contacted during verification processes provided non-answers that spoke louder than denials. The stability Claire had assumed he represented was revealed as temporary at best. Social consequences followed quickly. Mutual friends who had withdrawn began reconnecting cautiously, not out of loyalty, but out of recalibration. The version of events they had been given no longer matched observable outcomes. Silence was replaced with questions. Claire's final attempt at control occurred late at night through a message sent to multiple parties simultaneously. The message framed herself as overwhelmed and misrepresented, appealing to sympathy rather than facts. It backfired. The contradictions were now familiar to those receiving it. By the end of that week, systems had done what confrontation could not. Housing access was revoked. Financial entanglements were isolated. Professional consequences were formalized. Social narratives fractured beyond repair. The collapse was not explosive. It was comprehensive. What remained was not victory or relief, but clarity. The infrastructure that had supported deception had rejected it. There was nothing left to negotiate. The final realization of this phase was simple. Control had never been lost suddenly. It had been borrowed temporarily and returned with interest. The final phase did not arrive with confrontation. It arrived with notifications. Not dramatic ones. Administrative ones. Emails with neutral subject lines, calendar cancellations without explanations, access denials that did not invite discussion. These were not emotional reactions. They were outcomes. The property management company concluded its review and issued formal determinations. The altered lease documents were rejected outright, not flagged for correction or renegotiation. The conclusion was procedural and absolute. Access privileges were revoked pending reissuance under verified signatures. That reissuance never happened. Claire Whitmore lost the apartment within days, not through eviction theatrics, but through compliance failure. The unit was reclaimed by policy, not punishment. Jonah Price was removed from the building without ceremony. He was not escorted out or confronted. His access simply stopped working everywhere it mattered. The furniture remained. The structure vanished. Financial separation followed a similar pattern. Accounts were locked, then divided, then closed. What had once been shared through convenience was dismantled through documentation. No arguments. No bargaining. Just forms, deadlines, confirmations. I signed what applied to me and ignored what did not. Claire attempted to delay that process by requesting extensions and reconsiderations. None were granted. The paper trail she had created to support a quiet transition now prevented flexibility. Systems do not negotiate with contradictions. Professional consequences arrived next. The internal inquiry at Claire's workplace concluded without public disclosure, which was the most damaging outcome possible. She was removed from active projects immediately. Her access to internal systems was restricted pending review. Colleagues stopped asking questions and started making adjustments around her absence. Denise Rourke reached out once more, not to relay gossip, but to inform me that the situation had escalated beyond what anyone expected. The explanation Claire had relied on no longer functioned because too many versions existed simultaneously. Trust did not collapse loudly. It evaporated. Jonah's situation deteriorated independently. The exposure of unresolved housing disputes triggered secondary reviews unrelated to me. Past applications were re-examined. References were contacted. Patterns emerged that could not be reframed as coincidence. Whatever stability Claire believed Jonah represented proved temporary and contingent. He did not reach out to me directly. He did not need to. His absence from every context spoke clearly enough. Social realignment followed with uncomfortable precision. Friends who had gone silent reappeared cautiously, not with apologies, but with recalibration. They acknowledged receiving incomplete information without explicitly admitting fault. I did not correct them. I did not need to. Outcomes had already corrected the narrative. Claire's final attempt to regain footing came through an appeal to sympathy rather than control. She contacted family members, mutual acquaintances, and professional contacts with a unified message emphasizing stress and misunderstanding. The response was muted. Ruth Calder contacted me again, this time without warning or preparation. She confirmed that Claire had moved out temporarily and was staying with extended family. The tone was factual, not defensive. There was no request attached, only acknowledgement. The engagement ended formally through written confirmation rather than conversation. Rings were returned through intermediaries. Accounts were closed. Invitations were canceled. No announcements were made because there was nothing left to announce. The quiet that followed was not empty. It was structured. I relocated deliberately, not dramatically. I chose stability over symbolism. My routine reassembled around work, sleep, and controlled contact. The noise receded because there was nothing feeding it anymore. Weeks passed without incident, which was itself the resolution. The last consequence arrived unexpectedly. Howard Mills informed me that the building had updated its verification process as a result of the incident. Emergency contacts now required independent confirmation. Signature changes triggered automatic cross-checks. The system learned. That detail mattered more than any apology could have. Claire did not attempt contact again. Jonah disappeared from relevance entirely. Mutual acquaintances settled into new alignments without commentary. The version of events that survived was not dramatic. It was accurate. There was no sense of victory. There was relief in the absence of manipulation. What remained was clarity built from friction rather than forgiveness. I did not rebuild quickly. I rebuilt deliberately. The difference mattered. The story ended not because someone won, but because nothing remained unresolved.